Al Pacino stopped mid-sentence. Not at the end of a thought. Not at a natural pause. Mid-word, mid-breath, mid-everything, as if the air had been pulled from his lungs by something no one else in the studio could see. Jimmy Fallon leaned forward. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. 300 people watched Al Pacino turn his head slowly toward the back of the studio, toward the darkness beyond the stage lights, toward a sound that had come from somewhere in the seats. A sound no one could place. A sound Al Pacino had not heard in 43 years. It was a Thursday night taping. October 2023. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Al Pacino was the guest, a living legend at 83 years old, promoting his memoir, arriving at the kind of age where every appearance feels like a gift. The audience had been electric from the moment his name was announced. These were people who had grown up watching him. People who had sat in darkened theaters in the 1970s and felt something change in them that they could not name. People who still, to this day, could recite entire scenes by heart. Al Pacino walked onto the stage with the careful, deliberate movement of a man who has learned to carry the weight of who he has become. The applause was thunderous. He smiled, that small, private smile, and settled into the chair across from Jimmy Fallon as if he had sat there 1,000 times before. The interview had gone beautifully. Warmly, Al Pacino was funny and honest and sharp. Everything was exactly right. Jimmy Fallon was mid-question, something about the memoir, about what surprised him most in the writing of it, when from somewhere in the back of the studio came a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, not performative, just a sound. A few notes, sung softly, spontaneously, almost involuntarily, the way a person hums something without realizing they are doing it. Al Pacino stopped. The word he had been forming dissolved. His head turned slowly. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, the way a man turns when something has reached him at a frequency too deep for the conscious mind to name first. His right hand, which had been resting open on his knee, closed. The fingers curled in, one by one. Jimmy Fallon saw it happen. He watched the transformation cross Al Pacino's face in 3 distinct stages. Confusion, then something like recognition, then something that had no name, and Jimmy Fallon, who has conducted thousands of interviews in that chair, went completely still. "Al, hey, you okay, man?" Al Pacino did not answer. The entire studio froze. The band had stopped. The director in the control booth had not cut to commercial. The cameras kept rolling, instinctively, the way cameras do when something real begins to happen in a room built for performance. In the audience, 300 people were thinking the same thing in different words. Was he all right? Was it medical? He was 83 years old. Was something wrong? And then, Al Pacino spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphone on his lapel caught every syllable perfectly. That song. 2 words. Jimmy Fallon did not move. 300 strangers held their breath. Where did you hear that song? To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1980. Al Pacino wasn't always Al Pacino. Legend, icon. The actor whose face is synonymous with American cinema. In 1980, he was a man who was disappearing. The late 1970s and early 1980s were the hardest years of Al Pacino's life. He had given everything to his work: The Godfather, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, and Justice for All, and somewhere in the giving he had lost himself. The performances had been extraordinary. The person behind them was unraveling. He was drinking. He was isolated. He was turning down roles and missing auditions and disappearing for weeks at a time. The industry that had celebrated him was beginning, quietly, to worry. Some people who knew him then say that the early 1980s were the years when it could have gone either way. In the spring of 1980, his manager arranged for him to spend a month in a small house in Montauk, at the far eastern end of Long Island. Away from the city. Away from the press. Away from the machinery of his own fame. He remembers the drive out. He remembers the flatness of the land and the way the light changed as the ocean got closer. He remembers arriving at the house and sitting on the back porch and not knowing what to do with the quiet. There was a diner 3 blocks from the house. He ate there most mornings alone in a back booth, wearing sunglasses and a wool cap pulled low, and nobody bothered him. The second week, a girl in the booth across from him started humming. She was young, maybe 22, 23. Small, with dark hair and paint on her hands, and a paperback novel open beside her coffee cup. She was not humming anything recognizable, not any song with a name. It was a melody she seemed to be inventing as she went, soft and unhurried, barely above the ambient noise of the diner. Al Pacino took off his sunglasses. He sat there for 10 minutes, listening, not because he knew her, not because the melody was technically remarkable, but because it was the first sound in weeks that had reached him, the first thing that had gotten through. He asked if he could sit across from her. Her name was Elena Vasquez. 23 years old, a painter, studying at the Art Students League in Manhattan and spending the summer in Montauk because the light was different there, and her professor had told her that sometimes you have to go somewhere new to remember what you already know. She did not know who Al Pacino was. He had not, in a very long time, sat across from someone who did not know who Al Pacino was. They talked for 3 hours. About painting, and about acting, and about the difference between technique and truth. About what it felt like to give a performance and not know afterward whether it had come from you or from somewhere else. About what you do when you are afraid that the thing you love has used you up. Alina listened in the way that certain people listen, completely, without preparing her response, without looking for the moment she could speak. And when she spoke without performance. She said things that were true without dressing them up. Before he left the diner that morning, Al Pacino wrote down the melody she had been humming. On the back of his paper placemat, in his own handwriting, he transcribed the notes as best he could from memory, the shape of it, the intervals, the small hesitation in the third phrase that gave it its character. He folded the placemat twice. He put it in his jacket pocket. He told her, "I am going to use this someday, when I find the right place for it." She laughed. She said, "Then I'll be listening for it." His career recovered that year. His personal life stabilized. He returned to the work with something that had not been there before. A quietness at the center of it. A willingness to receive rather than only project. People who worked with him in the years that followed noticed the change without being able to name the source. Elena Vasquez moved back to Manhattan. They did not exchange contact information. Their time had passed the morning it began, and both of them had understood that. She had a good life. She taught painting at a community college in Brooklyn for 31 years. She raised 2 daughters. She attended Al Pacino films when they opened, sitting near the back. She never tried to reach him, and then last spring, her elder daughter, going through Elena's things after a diagnosis, a quiet and devastating one, found a letter. Addressed to Al Pacino. Never sent. Written in her mother's handwriting sometime in the 1980s, describing a morning in a diner in Montauk, and a man who had sat across from her and listened as if she were the most important person in the room. The daughter sent it to Al Pacino's production company. She did not expect a response. She received a phone call 4 days later. Behind the scenes, Al Pacino had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The Tonight Show staff had no idea why Al Pacino had a specific condition for his appearance, that a woman named Rosa Vasquez be given a seat in the studio audience, third row from the back, right side of the aisle, and that no one tell her he knew she was there. "I want her to feel like she's just watching the show," he had told the producer. "I need it to feel normal until it doesn't." Rosa Vasquez, Elena's daughter, had flown in from Brooklyn that morning. She had been told only that a seat had been arranged. She had brought her mother's letter in her coat pocket, and she had hummed, softly without thinking, her mother's melody, the one she'd heard all her life, as the interview began. Now the viewer understood. Al Pacino had turned toward the sound in the back of the studio because the sound was his. The melody on the placement, the notes he had written down in a diner in Montauk 43 years ago from a woman he had spoken with for 3 hours and never seen again. He had heard it once. He had carried it since. And now, he stood up. Jimmy Fallon stood up with him, instinctively pushing back his chair without realizing he was doing it. The director did not cut away. Questlove's drumsticks hung suspended. A cameraman in the far corner of the stage had stopped moving entirely. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Al Pacino walked off his own set. Not quickly, not dramatically. With the same careful, deliberate movement he had walked onto the stage with, except now there was nothing careful about it. Now it was a man walking toward the thing he had been walking toward for 4 decades without knowing where it was. He walked down the 3 steps from the stage. He walked into the studio floor. And then he stopped. Rosa Vasquez was standing in the aisle. 31 years old, dark hair, paint on her hands from a studio session that morning, a paperback novel tucked under her arm. Al Pacino looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. "Your mother," he said. His voice was barely controlled. "That was your mother's song." Rosa nodded. She could not speak. "She talked about you," Rosa said finally, her voice cracking. "She talked about that morning, her whole life. She said a man sat across from her and listened like she was the only person in the world." "She was," Al Pacino said. "That morning, she was." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out something folded, fragile, its edges worn soft with age. A placemat. Paper, creased and recreased along the same 4 lines for 43 years. On it, in faded pencil, a row of hand-transcribed musical notes. The melody. Her mother's melody. His handwriting. Rosa Vasquez put her hand over her mouth. "I've kept it since 1980, Al Pacino said. His hands were shaking. Every project, every move, every year. I was waiting to find the right place for it. And I think I finally understand that the right place was this." He held it out to her with both hands. Jimmy Fallon, standing at the edge of the stage, pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. His eyes were full. He turned to the audience and said, his voice unsteady, "Barely a professional in this moment, folks. I think we need to let's just be here for a second." The studio rose. 300 people on their feet, applauding for something they were only beginning to understand, that they had just witnessed not the reunion of 2 people, but the return of something a man had almost lost and instead had spent 43 years protecting. Rosa Vasquez held the placemat to her chest and wept. Al Pacino kept the melody in his memoir. In the acknowledgments, a single line. For E.V. Montauk, 1980. I heard you. Elena Vasquez passed away 6 weeks after her daughter's trip to New York. Peacefully, Rosa played The Tonight Show segment on a laptop in the hospital room on the last good afternoon. And Alana watched it twice, her hand in Rosa's hand, without saying anything. She didn't need to. The placemat is now framed in Rosa's apartment in Brooklyn, above the painting she keeps of her mother, a small canvas, imperfect, painted from memory in the light of a Montauk morning that Rosa never saw, but somehow always knew. The melody has no title. It was never recorded. It exists only in the memory of a woman who invented it without realizing she was giving it away, and in the heart of a man who spent 43 years keeping it safe until it found its way home. Some songs are not written for the world. They are written for one person to carry until the right hands can hold them.